Space Marines 2 is not all about unleashing doom on endless heaps of enemies. Well, it kind of is, but you also want to be smart about it. That's why today we'll take a look at the biggest mistakes you really want to avoid, especially if you're jumping into its very fun PvE co-op. Also, to mark the launch of this amazing game, I'm giving away another copy of Space Marines 2 on all platforms. Just make sure you're subscribed to the channel, like the video, and leave a comment down below. That being said, one of the first mistakes is not being aggressive enough, but you still want to be smart about it. This game is all about high aggression, over-the-top takedowns, which is how you stay alive. You definitely don't want to run away like a sissy just because a chunk of your HP just disappeared. And that is because of something called execute finishers. After you dealt enough damage or broke an enemy's defenses enough, you will see it flashing in red, and this is when you can move in to perform that execute. And in doing so, you will gain a number of benefits. On one side, this is going to recharge one of your armor gauges, the ones that you see below your HP bar. These are basically your first line of defense before your actual HP gets damaged, so you definitely want to pull this off quite often. Second of all, you're also completely immune for the entire duration of that finishing animation. So when you're in the thick of battle and lots of damage is about to hit you, this can actually be the difference between life or an early demise. Also, quick couple of extra combat tips over here. If you're low on armor and can't get a Majoris enemy executed in time, you can pop in 1 or 2 shots or even a melee hit in some of these smaller ones, and this can let you actually perform a quicker finisher against them that's just as good. Also, if you don't want to waste a finisher, what you can do is to actually spam E always when you're doing melee attacks, for example, or whichever other action you're performing. That is because finishers always take priority compared to anything else, so even if you're in the middle of a melee swing, for example, this will get overwritten by that finisher instead. Now, if enemies do manage to take down your armor gauges, then your entire HP bar will be exposed, and initially any damage against it will be highlighted in white with a gradual decrease over time, and that's going to be your contested health. However, it's not completely gone just yet. If you react in time and immediately deal damage back or perform an execute, you can actually replenish most of that before it's completely gone. That is why being highly aggressive can be rewarding in this game, but again, you do have to be smart about it. It's also important to keep in mind that because there aren't many ways to typically regen HP, you only have a few sources to do so, mostly which come in the form of these healing stims. And these can be rather limited, especially on higher difficulties, when both the number of drops of them as well as their effectiveness can drastically decrease in combat. Moving on though to tip number 2, another big mistake is not paying attention to the melee weapon defense type that you currently have equipped. I've seen way too many dudes charging into battle thinking they could pull off perfect parries, only to get blasted because they just weren't able to trigger them. And that is because they switched to a melee weapon that only had block on, so none of the other defense options. And that is because if you pay attention to your melee weapons, it will list different defense modes. And these are balanced, which have a moderate perfect parry window, and most weapons will start this way. Then there's fencing, which is going to give you a great increase to perfect parry windows. But then there's also blocking, and this one has no parry windows at all. Instead, you just mitigate damage when pressing and holding the block button. So if you want to pull those off or want to look cool for your friends, you might want to pay attention to this because you might have changed to a weapon that only features a block. And guess what? Every single weapon category features models of the same weapon that only has block in it. And some classes will care about this while others will not. So for example, Vanguards and even the Bulwark can have some extremely powerful options over there in terms of buffs to the perfect parries, like for example getting extra defenses or even performing AoE shockwaves, while others such as Assault don't really care much about it because they may rely more on blocking. And beyond this, I would also suggest checking out how suitable these weapons are for single or multi-target damage. You will see that by that gauge below, which is going to indicate how well they perform in AoE or single target scenarios. But since we were on the subject of perfect dodges and perfect parries, let's also talk about them. There are quite a few mistakes, and they also provide extra immunities and even generating more armor. The TLDR is that blue flash attacks can be blocked and parried, while orange/red ones cannot, so you should probably dodge away from them. However, pay attention to the blue attacks coming from the small fry enemies. These are an excellent source of a quick armor top-up as well as a quick immunity window. Oftentimes, in the middle of combat, you will see them doing these jump attacks, and you can actually press that parry button relatively early, even in that animation, and your character is still going to grab them in air and perform that quick attack finisher. And this is going to again provide 1 armor gauge as well as give you slight immunity during that quick animation. As far as the larger enemies, the rule of thumb is that typically their attacks are a bit more delayed than they appear, so the window of parrying is a bit more tighter. Keep in mind, once again, I'm referring to the blue flashing attacks. So folks who played Souls-like games should feel right at home with the parrying windows on these. You just have to wait just before that attack is about to hit you. The parry windows over here can be quite forgiving, especially if you go with fencing weapons, which will increase that time of reaction. Now, if you struggle with this for some reason, I recommend just opting for perfect dodges instead. They are much easier to pull off against larger targets and bosses compared to perfect parries. And in doing so, you can also then follow up with quick headshots. And you don't even have to think too much about it, like you can just press the button to shoot and you're going to see your character immediately auto-aim at their head, pop one off, and that can help you quite a ton with damage. And these special headshots deal much more damage than the usual, but they also do not consume any ammo at all, so you can probably use them even with an empty mag. Plus, if you do follow-up headshots after that, which take down the target completely, you will quickly replenish that ammo right away. So again, small fry enemies can fit this criteria very well. With that out of the way though, let's move on to number 4, which is character progression. Once you complete the first couple of chapters in the main story campaign, you can then unlock the launch bay and pretty much gain access to operations, at the very least the first operation and the eternal PvP war. And this is where you will spend most of your time in PvE typical co-op fashion, level up and upgrade the 6 currently available classes in the game. And every single class has a perk tree that you're going to progressively unlock the skills of as you gain levels. We're going to talk about their usefulness in just a little bit, but there are 24 points in total that you'll eventually unlock, all divided into 4 sections. So typically we have core, which gives you offensive and defensive upgrades. Then we have the team skills, which pretty much mean group-wide buffs. Then we have the gear section, which enhances different abilities regarding the weapons and other ultimates over there. And then finally signature, which are the strongest, providing unique and even class-defining bonuses for you, but sometimes also for your whole party. For example, one of the heavy class signature skills lets all of your squad mates to regenerate abilities 50% faster, but there are even stronger ones. And beyond that, there's also the weapon progression, which is completely separate with its own separate skill tree. So instead of your typical item drops, each class has access to a limited range of categories of weapons, except tactical, which kind of has most of them available. And checking the weapons, you will see them listing versions as well as perks. So let me explain them really quickly. Versions, think of these as rarity. The more you use a weapon category, the more your experience will increase with that category, letting you access higher grade options within that category, such as mastercrafted, artisan, and eventually even relic. So you have to actually use these weapons in combat, take down enemies, which in turn gives you XP for it, and that's how you're going to progress into that next tier. However, you really want to unlock that tier once it becomes available, once you have met that XP requirement and it gets highlighted over there in that section. This will cost Armory data, so we're going to talk about that in just a bit, but if you do not activate that next tier once it's ready, any XP that you gain for that same weapon will simply not count, as you won't make any progress until that tier gets unlocked. So absolutely make sure you do that every single time. Now, once a new tier is unlocked, this gives you access to several typically better variants of that weapon that you can now unlock with the requisition, which is one of the other main currencies that you will get from completing operations. However, a mistake here would be to focus just on that one weapon you think is best from that new section and ignoring the rest. And typically you have 3 options to pick as you go higher and higher in the tiers. That would make you miss out on a ton of mastery points, which you can spend to power up that category even more via its perk tree. So let's move on to the perk tree next, as you're going to always want to unlock and max out every weapon in every tier, as that's how you're going to get extra mastery points that you can then spend here to unlock even more amazing bonuses. Once a tier is unlocked using Armory data, you can then spend requisition, or well, your other main currency, to unlock that specific weapon. And now you can go ahead and use it in combat. And once a new tier is unlocked, you will also notice a corresponding section will similarly open under the perk tree as well. These power-ups can be quite game-defining and are another way to personalize your build and make it even stronger. But if you look at the newly unlocked weapon, you will notice these now also list an XP requirement. And that's what you need to complete to get that weapon's mastery point. And there are two ways in which you can unlock these, either by just, again, using it in combat the normal way, taking down enemies and earning XP for it, or you can just bypass all of that and just buy it directly with even more requisition points, typically like 75 or plus. So yes, there is a way to fast track this, especially as you progress with at least a couple of classes and get a lot of that requisition, enough to power level some of your other classes as well, especially since you're going to be getting a lot of armory data. So at some stage, eventually you can power up other classes and try them out even easier because you just maxed out one of them prior. But even if that initial requisition cost may appear high, I still think it's worth spending it most of the time if that means to unlock the next best thing or an extra, for example, mastery point that might power up your character even more. This may mean you can jump into a higher difficulty operation much sooner or complete it much faster, kind of snowballing again, like I said, into a much quicker progression. Also, another quick tip over here and the mistake to avoid is that some weapon categories may have a shared progression between multiple classes. So for example, there are weapon categories that are common among multiple of these classes, which means if you want to have a quicker progression with some of them, you can probably look at what these weapons are and kind of pick accordingly, not necessarily something that is meta or top tier right now, as then you can simply continue to use that same weapon fully upgraded on a different class. So for example, both the heavy and the sniper use a standard issue bolt pistol, and since I already upgraded that on the heavy class, I can pretty much use the exact same one at the same level on the sniper as well, and pretty much any other class that can share the same weapon. It works for all of them. But we kept talking about armory data and other currencies, so let's cover them and how to make the most out of them. For the most of you, you're going to be getting them through operations, the online PvE co-op matchups that pit you against all of the enemies you encountered in the main campaign. And how much of those currencies and XP you get is determined by the difficulty you play in. The higher the difficulty, from average to substantial all the way to ruthless, the more requisition, XP, and higher grade armory data you will get. And you will need to push to substantial and eventually to ruthless if you want the purple and the orange data for the higher weapon tiers later on. This comes at a cost, however. You will get increased respawn timers if you get downed, much deadlier enemies, even less effective healing stims, and so on, but it's worth it, and even that level requirement should not discourage you. So currently it's listed level 5, 10, and 15 for the final 3 difficulty spikes. However, if you're spot on with your dodging, parries, and generally know your positioning and the strengths of your class, you're typically going to fare much better, and you can just jump in a bit earlier than those level requirements. Maybe not so in ruthless, but you can still do it for the first couple. Now, if for some reason you do need some extra requisition, what you can do is complete the trials. In fact, I highly suggest doing these first before jumping in with all of the class specific options. I highly encourage you to do so because you can easily get 75 requisition for every single class plus 3 mastercrafted data if you go with an A tier for the trials. This can mean hundreds if you do them all, and typically it's going to snowball you very early on. Plus, trials are very easy and give you a general good idea of how that class actually plays, plus what are the skill-based options and the punishing points of it. Next, we have exploration, and this is another big point I see a lot of people messing up, not doing exploration, which means missing out on a ton of armory data and other useful drops. So in every run, there's always going to be one of these extra armory datas laying around in some of these adjacent routes and other secret rooms. It's always worth to go and grab them, as they will actually count for all members of the team. So only one team member has to pick it up for this to count for everybody. Another thing is to look out and always defeat the mini bosses spawning randomly, such as the Carnifex, the Neurothrope, and so on, especially since once you defeat them, they will drop an additional armory data on top. So you can actually finish with multiple of these per run, not just get one of them, meaning that you save so much time and get so many other options to upgrade that character. And speaking of that, another mistake is to waste time on clearing out every enemy in every matchup. The extra XP right now is really small, barely anything, so if you want a more efficient route, sometimes it's a great idea to go ahead and skip some of the non-essential enemy fights. So until the raids get buffed, you might just want to go ahead for the main objectives, as that's going to give you the most amount of XP at the end. Beyond this, another point of pain for many classes is access to ammo, healing packs, and droppables, so a good source of that are these green smashable boxes you find all over the place. Always try to destroy them, as they almost always guarantee drop ammo packs, healing stims, grenade, and even armor boosts. Keep in mind though that some of these can be quite limited, so try to leave off some of the health stims for some of the party members who really need them, especially the frontliners or the ones who are on the verge of death. And speaking of armor boosts, these will provide an extra armor gauge beyond your maximum one provided by your own class. However, keep in mind that they don't regenerate once they are destroyed or depleted, so they only last until then, or until you get another armor boost. However, armor boosts also fully replenish all of your armor bars, so if for example you're in the middle of combat, it's smart to keep these off for when the true challenge really comes in, and then you can pop them off if you're really low. Additionally, you'll find infinite ammo crates at the start of most major areas. However, they also get to spawn many times midway through the levels as well. Just in time when you're about to go low on ammo, this will help a ton to top up and continue fighting without having to stop. And by the way, I also suggest always marking them with the focus attention command when you stumble upon them. Default T on the keyboard, as this is going to let your teammates also know where they are. And they don't just spawn in the crates, by the way, you oftentimes find them randomly scattered around, so this can be quite helpful. But we are rapidly closing to the end of the video, and I have some other bonus tips over here for you. So if you want to power level any of the classes a bit faster, another thing to pay attention to in levels is gene seeds. Another thing you can grab off the ground, again, only once per match and fully randomized where it drops, but this rewards you with some extra XP. However, if you get downed when you carry this, it gets completely destroyed, so you have to be careful about using it, but if you manage to successfully bring it all the way to the end, you gain some extra XP for yourself and your party mates. Another thing is to not shy away from using grenades. Throwables are quite abundant in this game. You don't really want to hold them off too much, as they can provide some extra clearance, damage, and even ways to slow down enemies, especially for the shock grenades. However, keep clear of the Melta bombs you place around and only detonate them when you're far enough from them. You really don't want to get caught in the damage explosion, otherwise they may even one-shot you. Another tip is that these loadout machines that you find randomly in every level are a great way to top up your ammo, not just change out your loadout in the middle of that combat. So you can definitely use these, select the same loadout you currently have equipped, and this is going to give you full ammo reserves back, just like how you would do from that infinite ammo cache. Another couple extra combat tips I have is to always destroy the poison traps that the enemy snipers leave behind. It only takes one single bullet, but it helps you so much because otherwise they will severely slow you down, also cause that poison buildup which destroys your armor, and it's really annoying to deal with. And second of all, also try to interrupt any enemies that you see alerting or calling for reinforcements. You can easily do this with any melee attack that breaks the enemy defense or with a strong enough weapon hit. This is going to save you a lot of headaches, as otherwise it's going to spawn way too many enemies to handle. That's why I also recommend to pay attention to your melee combos and don't just mindlessly mash them. Pay attention especially to the ones featuring the icon with the broken shield. That's going to also interrupt your enemies besides just breaking their defenses. Like for example, in the case of the heavy, the earth shaker is really strong. I just charge a heavy and then do a slight pause and then charge another one, and it's basically a two stomp that completely shatters enemies around me. But other classes and weapons have different options. On top of that, I also recommend to not wait too long when you're charging up attacks. You literally only have to do it until the animation barely starts and then unleash it, and you're going to still deal the full brunt force of the damage. Same goes with the hammer. You don't have to wait until it's fully charged. Just wait for like a second until the character holds it in both hands, then unleash it for the full AoE damage of it. And that pretty much concludes today's video. Of course, this is going to give you all the things you need from this point on, all the upgrades, all the customization options you can then unlock. As you progress more and more, you can unlock all of these awesome armors, suits, and collars to pretty much really look the part when you go in and start fighting against all of these hordes of endless enemies. Looks really awesome. Again, let me know down below in the comments if there's any other tip or mistake that you might want to mention. In the meantime, thanks so much for watching, and until next time.